"Don't bother coming for Christmas, Dad. We're keeping it family only this year." That was the entire message. 11 words. No punctuation at the end. No explanation. No apology. Just those 11 words, sent at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, while I was sitting in my recliner watching the evening news with a cup of decaf going cold on the side table. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the armrest and stared at the muted television for a long time. My son's name is Nathan. He's 34 years old. I remember the exact day he was born, February 9th, a Thursday. So cold, the hospital parking lot had a sheet of black ice, and I slipped getting out of the car and tore the knee out of my good slacks. I didn't even feel it until hours later. I was too busy holding this small, red-faced person who had my wife Carol's nose and my father's chin, and absolutely no idea what he'd walked into. I sat in that hospital chair with him in my arms, and I made every silent promise a man can make to another person. I kept them. Every single one. Carol died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which the doctors said was mercifully fast, and which felt, to me, like being pushed off a building in slow motion. Nathan was there for the funeral. He cried. I thought that meant something. I still think it did, actually. I think Nathan, somewhere underneath everything that's happened, is still the person I raised. I just don't think he's been that person much lately. His wife's name is Melanie. I want to be careful about how I describe Melanie, because I've spent 6 years trying very hard to be fair to her. She came from a family where money was tight, and nothing was given easily, and I understood early on that my situation made her uncomfortable in a way she never quite knew how to handle. I own my house outright 3-bedroom colonial in Raleigh, North Carolina, paid off 11 years ago. I spent 31 years as an electrical engineer, the last 14 as a senior project manager for a commercial construction firm, and I was not extravagant with money. Carol and I lived below our means our entire marriage. We drove used cars. We took one real vacation every 3 years. We put Nathan through college without loans. When Carol got sick, we had enough to cover everything without wiping ourselves out. And when she died, I was 61 years old, with a paid-off house, a pension, a healthy 401, and very little idea what to do with myself. Nathan and Melanie had been married 2 years at that point. They were renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Charlotte, about 2.5 hours from me. Nathan was working in sales for a tech company, making decent money, but not remarkable money. Melanie had been doing part-time bookkeeping before they had my grandson, Cooper, and then she stopped working entirely, which was a choice I respected without comment. Cooper was born 8 months after Carol died. I drove to Charlotte the afternoon. Melanie went into labor, and I sat in that waiting room, and I thought about Carol, about how much she would have given to be there. And when Nathan came out and put that baby in my arms, I felt something loosen in my chest that had been wound tight for 8 months. Cooper had my son's eyes and Carol's coloring, pale and fine-featured, and he grabbed my finger with a grip that surprised me, and I told him quietly that his grandmother would have loved him completely. I meant that sincerely. I still mean it. It was Cooper, partly, that started everything. I wanted to help. That's the only honest explanation I can give for what the next 4 years looked like. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to be present. I wanted Nathan to have breathing room, the way Carol and I never quite did when he was small and we were juggling 2 careers and a mortgage and the 1,000 small emergencies of raising a child. I had the means to give my son something I hadn't had, and I genuinely believed that was a good thing to do. I started small. When Nathan mentioned the apartment lease was up and they were looking at houses, I offered to help with the down payment. $22,000. Enough to get them into a 3-bedroom in a decent school district in a Charlotte suburb called Mint Hill. Nathan thanked me the way you thank someone for holding a door, politely, briefly, moving on. I didn't think much of it at the time. A few months later, Melanie's car needed a transmission replacement that was going to cost more than the car was worth. I bought her a used Honda CR-V, $11,000. Clean title, low miles, reliable. She said, "Thank you." Nathan sent me a text that said, "You didn't have to do that, Dad." I took it as gratitude. Then, Nathan changed jobs. The new position had a better long-term trajectory, he explained. but the base salary was lower for the first year while he built his client book. Could I help with the mortgage for a few months, just while he got established? The mortgage was $2,100 a month. I said yes. The few months turned into 11. I'm not telling this story to make myself sound like a martyr. I made choices. I signed up for every one of them with my own hand. But I want to be honest about how it accumulated, because it didn't feel like accumulation at the time. Each thing felt individual. Each thing felt like a response to a specific situation. It was only when I sat down, on the night of that 11-word Christmas message, and pulled up my banking history for the past 3 years, that I saw the full shape of it. I got a yellow legal pad from the desk drawer. I still write things out by hand when I need to think clearly. Carol used to tease me about it. She did everything on her phone, calendars and lists and reminders, and I was the last person she knew who kept a paper checkbook register. Old habits. I sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad and my laptop open to the bank portal, and I started making a list. Mortgage assistance, 11 months, $23,100. Honda CR-V, $11,000. Down payment contribution, $22,000. Cooper's private preschool tuition. Nathan had approached me about that 14 months ago. The public preschool options in their area were fine, he said, but there was a private program with a stronger curriculum that ran $4,200 per semester. He asked if I could contribute. I paid the full amount, 2 semesters, $8,400. Melanie's dental work. She needed 2 crowns and a root canal last spring, and their dental insurance had an annual maximum that didn't cover it, $3,200. The vacation to Hilton Head. Nathan suggested it as a family trip last summer, positioned it as a chance for all of us to spend time together, mentioned it would be a good memory for Cooper. I paid for the rental house. A week on the beach, $4,600. Melanie and Nathan paid for their own food and activities. I bought Cooper a boogie board and a bucket and shovel set and took him to the beach every morning while his parents slept in. Miscellaneous. I'd been sending a monthly transfer of $800 that Nathan had asked for about 2 years ago, describing it as help closing a gap between their income and expenses while they got ahead of some credit card debt. That transfer had continued every month since. 22 months. $17,600. I wrote the total at the bottom of the page. $89,900. I looked at that number for a while. I'm not a man who shocks easily, but that number sat in my stomach like something cold. $89,900 in just under 4 years. Not counting what I'd paid for the down payment. Not counting the smaller things, the grocery runs when I visited, the birthday gifts, and Christmas presents I'd given Melanie's parents on 2 occasions to be polite, the times I'd quietly paid a restaurant bill. If I added all of it, the number crossed into 6 figures easily. I put the pen down and looked at the kitchen ceiling. It was quiet. The house is always quiet now in a way it wasn't when Carol was alive, when there was always some noise, the television she kept on for company, the sound of her moving around. Her voice, I've gotten used to quiet, mostly. But that night, the quiet felt like something pressing on my chest. I picked up the phone and read Nathan's message again. Don't bother coming for Christmas, Dad. We're keeping it family only this year. Family only. I thought about that phrase for a long time. I thought about what it implied, and who it excluded, and who it included. I thought about the Christmas 3 years ago when I drove to Charlotte with a carload of gifts and spent the day cooking dinner because Melanie said she was tired, which she was. She'd been up with Cooper, who had an ear infection, and I understood that. I didn't mind. I washed every dish after dinner. I drove home at 9 o'clock at night with the car empty of presents and a Tupperware container of leftover ham on the passenger seat. I thought about last Christmas, when I suggested they come to Raleigh for once, and Melanie said the drive was too long for Cooper. He's 4 years old. The drive is 2.5 hours. I thought about Nathan's voice on the phone 2 months ago, upbeat and easy, when he mentioned they were thinking about upgrading to a larger house, something with a 4th bedroom and a bigger yard. He mentioned his mortgage pre-approval would be easier with a stronger debt-to-income ratio. He didn't ask me directly for anything. He just mentioned it. I understood what he was mentioning. I thought about Melanie's tone at Thanksgiving last year. We did see each other then. I was allowed at Thanksgiving then when I made a comment about Cooper starting kindergarten next fall and whether they'd looked into the public school options. She laughed, not unkindly, and said Cooper's going to Ridgemont, which is the private elementary school in their area, tuition approximately $9,000 a year. She said it the way you say something that's already decided and not really up for discussion. I sat at the kitchen table until almost 2 in the morning. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. But I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark in the room Carol and I shared for 28 years, and I thought about something she said to me once. Not about Nathan, but about her own sister, who had a pattern of taking and not acknowledging, and then acting surprised when called on it. Carol had very little patience for that particular dynamic. There's a difference between giving and being given to, she said. One of them, you have a choice. The other one, you don't even realize the choice has been made for you. I had understood what she meant at the time. I understood it more thoroughly now. The next morning I got up at my usual time, 6:15, made coffee, and sat at the table with the legal pad again. I wasn't angry, exactly. I want to make that clear because I think people expect anger in a story like this. And I'm telling it honestly. What I felt was something more like clarity. Specific, quiet clarity. The kind that comes after you've spent enough time in the fog that you forgot what clear air smelled like. I called my financial advisor that morning. His name is Gerald. He's been managing my accounts for 12 years. And I trust him the way you trust someone who's been professionally honest with you through circumstances that invited dishonesty. I told him I wanted to sit down and look at my overall financial picture, reassess what I was allocating where, and make some changes. He said he could see me Friday. Wednesday, I called my attorney. I had a will on file that needed updating anyway. Carol's death had required various adjustments, and I'd handled the essentials, but never sat down to fully revisit it. I told her I wanted to come in and do a proper review. She had an opening Thursday afternoon. I didn't respond to Nathan's message. I read it again Wednesday morning and thought about what response I could send that would be honest without being dramatic, and I couldn't think of one, so I said nothing. Thursday, I drove to my attorney's office and spent 90 minutes reviewing my will and estate documents. My attorney is a careful woman who has been doing this work for a long time and who asked me thoughtful questions without prying. I told her I wanted to establish a separate educational trust for Cooper, funded independently and structured so that the funds could only be used for Cooper's actual educational expenses, tuition, books, supplies, and would be administered through the trust rather than through his parents. She nodded, like this was not an unusual request, and made notes. I also made some other adjustments that I won't detail here, but which I had been meaning to make for a while, and which now felt overdue. The Cooper decision was not something I agonized over. It might seem like it should have been harder, but it wasn't. Cooper is 5 years old. He didn't choose his parents. He didn't choose this situation. Whatever is true about Nathan and Melanie, Cooper is blameless, and I'm not a man who punishes children for their parents' behavior. I love that boy from the moment he grabbed my finger, and I will love him when he's 34, and perhaps more capable of understanding what love actually costs. Friday, I sat with Gerald for 2 hours, and we went through everything. I was thorough. I showed him the list I'd made on the yellow legal pad. He looked at the total and kept his face neutral, which I appreciated. We discussed what was automatic and what wasn't, which transfers could be stopped immediately, and which needed a notice period. The monthly $800 transfer was a simple recurring ACH. It could be stopped with a click. The mortgage assistance had been case by case, so there was nothing recurring to cancel there. The preschool tuition was already paid through the current semester. I drove home and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and my phone. I looked at Nathan's message one more time. Don't bother coming for Christmas, Dad. We're keeping it family only this year. I thought about writing something long. I thought about writing something that explained what I'd found when I added up the numbers. Something that laid out the ledger and asked him to look at it the way I had looked at it. But I've known my son for 34 years. And I know that a long message from me would be read defensively, looked to for attack points, and answered in a way that was fundamentally about protecting Melanie's position. That's how it had worked every other time I'd tried to have a direct conversation. So I wrote him a short message instead. I said, "Thanks for letting me know, Nathan. I understand. I'll be taking some time to reassess a few things on my end. Talk soon." That was it. No exclamation point. No questions. No accusations. Then I opened my bank's mobile application and went to the recurring transfers section. I found the $800 monthly transfer to Nathan's account. I had set it up so long ago that I'd half forgotten it was there. The way you forget about a faucet that drips so constantly it becomes part of the ambient noise of the house. I looked at it for a moment. Then I canceled it. I went back to the main screen and checked that it had processed. It had. I put the phone in my pocket and stood at the kitchen window, looking at the backyard. Carol's rose bushes were still out there along the back fence, bare in December, which they always were, waiting. I thought about calling someone, my brother in Greensboro, maybe, or my friend Hank from the firm, who knew Nathan and would understand the context. But I didn't feel the urge to talk about it. Not yet. I just stood there, in the quiet. 22 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Nathan. I looked at his name on the screen for 2 full rings, then answered. "Dad." His voice was tightly controlled in a way that told me he was working to keep it that way. "I just got a notification that the transfer was canceled." "Yes," I said. "I'm making some changes to my finances. Gerald and I talked it through yesterday." "What does that mean? You're making changes?" "It means I'm reassessing what I'm doing with my money," I said, which is something I probably should have done a while ago. Silence. Then, "Is this because of my message about Christmas?" "It's because of a lot of things," I said. "Your message happened to arrive at a time when I was already thinking about some of this." "Dad." His voice shifted, something between frustration and the beginning of something else. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I waited. "Melanie's parents are coming. Her whole family. It's a bigger event this year, and she wanted it to be just her side." "I understood the message," I said. "It's not that you're not family. It's just..." "Nathan," I said, "I'm not calling to argue about Christmas. I genuinely don't want to do that. I just want you to know that I'm taking some time to look carefully at my financial situation and make decisions that are right for me going forward. That's all." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What decisions?" "I'll keep you informed about anything that directly affects you," I said. "But some of it is just general housekeeping. I should have done it sooner." He said my name again. I heard something shift in his voice, a drop in register that I recognized from when he was a teenager and had done something he knew was wrong and was trying to decide whether to admit it or outmaneuver it. He'd never been good at the outmaneuver. That was always Melanie's skill. "Can we talk about this in person?" he asked. "Of course," I said. "I'm here whenever you want to drive up." We hung up. I went to the stove and reheated the rest of the morning's coffee, which I almost never do because reheated coffee is terrible. But I did it that afternoon because I needed something to do with my hands. The texts from Melanie started about an hour later. I need to say here that I have never disliked Melanie. I want to be honest about that. I think she is a person who grew up feeling that security was precarious and responded to my generosity the way some people respond to an open pantry by taking more than they needed because some part of them was always waiting for the pantry to be locked. I think she and Nathan built a life at a standard they couldn't actually afford and then quietly structured that life around my willingness to fill the gap. I don't think it was a conscious conspiracy. I think it was the particular kind of thoughtlessness that sets in when someone has been comfortable for long enough that they stop examining why. But I also think she knew. At some level, she knew. The way she never fully met my eyes at Thanksgiving, the way she'd grown quieter around me over the past year, as though she could sense something building. The way that Christmas message had been sent at 11:47 at night by Nathan, which I'd bet a significant amount of money was drafted with Melanie sitting next to him. Her first text said, "I think there may have been a misunderstanding about Christmas and I want to clear it up." Her second, 20 minutes later, "Nathan is really upset. Can you call him?" Her third, after another 30 minutes, "I know you've done a lot for us, and I want you to know that we're grateful. We would never want you to think otherwise." I read each one. I didn't respond to any of them. My phone rang twice more that afternoon, Nathan again at 4:15, then a number I didn't recognize at 5:30 that I let go to voicemail. The voicemail was from Nathan's father-in-law, a man named Dale, who I had met 6 times in 4 years, and who now apparently felt moved to call me on behalf of his daughter and son-in-law to encourage me to reconsider whatever it was I was reconsidering. He was polite about it, I'll give him that. I deleted the message and wondered briefly how that conversation had gone, the part where Melanie had to explain to her parents why her father-in-law was apparently cutting off financial support. That explanation would have required some interesting editing. The next 2 days were quiet. Nathan didn't come to Raleigh. Melanie's texts stopped. I went to my regular Saturday morning breakfast at a place on Glenwood Avenue where I've been going for 11 years, and where the waitress knows I take my eggs over medium and my coffee black, and I ate my breakfast and read the paper and felt, honestly, something close to peaceful. It was on Sunday that my granddaughter called. I should clarify, I have 2 grandchildren, Cooper, who is Nathan's boy, and Lily, who is my daughter Renee's daughter. Renee is my younger child, 31, lives in Asheville with her husband Marcus, and teaches 3rd grade, and is by any fair accounting the least complicated relationship in my life. She is direct and warm, and was the first person to tell me, about 2 years ago, that what I was doing for Nathan and Melanie was too much, Dad, by a lot. I had thanked her for the opinion and not changed my behavior, which she accepted without making it a fight, because that's how Renee operates. She called Sunday morning, not to weigh in, just to check in. She'd heard from Nathan, apparently. She let me talk, asked 2 or 3 questions, and then said, "Are you okay?" I told her I was better than okay. She said, "Good." Then she said, "Do you need me to drive over?" I told her no, I was fine. She said she'd be at Christmas with Lily, at my house, the way we'd planned, and that she was looking forward to it. That was the entirety of what I needed from anyone in that moment, and Renee knew it without being told. Monday brought an email from Nathan. Longer than his usual communication, Nathan is not a writer, in the way some people are not swimmers, technically capable but deeply uncomfortable. The email was 4 paragraphs. The first was an apology for the way the Christmas message came across. The second explained the financial pressure they'd been under lately, a reference to the new house search, a mention of Melanie's desire to return to part-time work, but needing the childcare situation to be right first, a general invocation of how expensive everything had gotten. The third paragraph asked whether we could discuss the monthly transfer, whether maybe it could be reinstated at a different amount, whether I would be willing to talk about a schedule for the mortgage on the new house they were hoping to move into in the spring. The fourth paragraph said he missed me and he loved me and he was sorry. I read that paragraph 3 times. I sat with Nathan's email for the better part of the day. I drafted a response and deleted it. I drafted another one and saved it without sending. Eventually, in the late afternoon, I called him not because I'd decided how to handle the money, but because the 4th paragraph deserved a response, and the 4th paragraph had nothing to do with money. He answered on the 2nd ring. He sounded tired. We talked for almost an hour. It was the most honest conversation we'd had since Carol died, which tells you something about the previous 5 years. I didn't raise my voice. He didn't get defensive the way I'd expected. At some point early in the conversation, I said, "I need you to understand what the last few years have looked like from where I'm standing," and I read him the list from the yellow legal pad, all of it, every line and every dollar. There was a long silence when I finished. Then Nathan said quietly, "I didn't realize it was that much." I believed him. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I think he genuinely didn't hold that number in his head. I think each request had been individual enough, and my yes had been consistent enough, that he never did the arithmetic, which is its own kind of problem. You can let yourself not know things you have a responsibility to know, but it is different from deliberate exploitation, and I wanted to be fair about the difference. "I didn't raise you to live someone else's financial life," I said. "I raised you to build your own." Another silence. Then, "I know. I'm not angry at you," I said, which was true. "I'm tired of the version of us that's been happening. I want a different one." He asked me what that looked like. I told him the monthly transfer was done and that I would not be contributing to the purchase of a new house. I told him that I had set up an independent educational trust for Cooper that would cover his schooling expenses through the end of high school, structured so that the funds went directly to the institution and couldn't be redirected. He was quiet when I said that. I think he understood, without my saying it, that the trust was structured specifically because I didn't fully trust the money to pass through his hands. I told him I would like to see him and to see Cooper, and that I hoped we could work toward a version of our relationship that didn't have a financial transaction at its center. I told him I was his father and that wasn't going to change. He said he'd like that. He said he'd talk to Melanie. He said he was sorry. Not the way people say it to end a conversation, but with a longer pause before the word. Like he'd located it somewhere specific. We hung up. I stood at the window again. I do a lot of standing at that window. I've come to realize it's where I go when I need to look at something that isn't what's directly in front of me. The backyard was gray and still, the rose bushes bare against the fence. Carol would have known what to say in this situation. She always knew what to say when it involved Nathan. She had a clarity about people she loved that was not sentimental, not indulgent, but clear-eyed the way good water is clear. You could see straight to the bottom. She would have done this earlier, I thought. She would not have let it go this far. I accepted that without self-flagellation. I made the choices I made for the reasons I had at the time. Grief does things to judgment. Loneliness does things to judgment. The desire to still be useful, to still be necessary to the people you raised, does things to judgment. I wasn't a fool. I was a man who wanted to love people the way he knew how to love them, and I went too long without examining whether the love was landing. Christmas was quiet, and better than any holiday I'd had in 3 years. Renee came from Asheville on Christmas Eve with Marcus and Lily, who is 3, and had very specific opinions about everything, including where the ornaments should go on the tree and what Christmas required in terms of bedtime flexibility. I cooked the whole dinner prime rib, which Carol used to make, and which I'd taught myself after she died, following her handwritten recipe card with a focus that probably looked excessive from the outside, but was, for me, a kind of prayer. We ate at my dining room table, the 4 of us plus Lily in a booster seat, and we talked and laughed, and Lily fell asleep on the couch 20 minutes before midnight, and Marcus carried her to the guest room. Renee and I sat at the kitchen table after and had a glass of bourbon, and talked until almost 2 in the morning about everything and nothing. Carol and Marcus's work, and a book Renee was reading, and a neighbor of mine she'd always liked who'd recently moved away. Nathan came up briefly. Renee asked how I was feeling about all of it, and I told her honestly, cautiously, okay. She nodded. He'll figure it out, she said. He's always been slower than you need him to be, but he figures it out. She was usually right about her brother. I held on to that. Nathan called on Christmas afternoon. He wished me a Merry Christmas. He put Cooper on the phone, and Cooper told me at length about a toy excavator he'd received that morning and demonstrated its various features through the phone with a level of technical specificity impressive in a 5-year-old. I laughed more in that 3-minute phone call than I had in a month. I told Cooper I'd come see him soon and that we'd take the excavator to the park. He said, okay, and handed the phone back to Nathan. Nathan said, before he hung up, I meant what I said, Dad. I'm going to do better. I said, I know, son. I said it because I believed it. And because even when I was least sure of Nathan, I had never stopped believing in the person he was underneath the person circumstance had made him. That's what it means to be a parent. You hold 2 truths at once without letting either one crush the other. He is the person who hurt me, and he is also the person I watched take his first steps in this kitchen 32 years ago, letting go of the cabinet door with one hand and then the other, staggering out into the open space of the room with the look of someone who suddenly realized the ground is less certain than they thought. He figured that out too. In January, I went to Gerald's office again, and we looked at the full picture of my finances without the ongoing transfers and contributions. The numbers were good, better than good. If I was honest, the previous 4 years had been expensive, but they hadn't been ruinous, because I'd built something solid enough to survive generosity run loose. Gerald asked me how I was feeling, and I said, clear. He said it looked like I had a clear plan, I said I was working on it. I drove home through Raleigh in the pale January light, through the neighborhoods I've known for 3 decades, past the street where Nathan went to middle school, and the park where he had his first Little League practice, and the grocery store where Carol and I used to go on Saturday mornings and split a coffee from the bakery counter and walk the park, aisles without a list, because we knew them by heart. I thought about what I'd built. The literal house paid off. The financial cushion. The version of my life that I'd constructed alongside Carol over 40 years, careful and sturdy and mine. And I thought about what needed building, still not materially, but in the other sense. The relationship with my son that I wanted to have versus the relationship we'd been having. The version of being Nathan's father that didn't require a checkbook. The possibility that we could be in the same room at Christmas without one of us owing the other something. That work was going to take longer than a canceled transfer and an honest phone call. I understood that, but it had started in a specific way, on a specific night, when 11 words came in at 11:47, and I sat in my recliner and understood clearly that something had to change. Not for anger, not even exactly for justice, but because there is a difference between giving freely and being quietly drained, and because I had spent 6 years confusing the two, and because Carol, precise and loving and entirely unwilling to let the people she loved fool themselves, would not have let me go on confusing them. I got home. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window looking at the rose bushes against the back fence, the bare canes holding their shape, waiting for what they always waited for. Spring was still a long way off, but I wasn't worried. I had time